Collected by a Bluetooth, is it?
Lock you in.
All right. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask you all just to mute yourself as you come in, please? And hello and welcome to our webinar on ensuring legal compliance through difficult times. My name is Tracy Bird and I run the SCVO Trustee Essentials Network, which is sponsored by CCLA, and they are the UK's largest charity fund manager. So do join our trustees network if you haven't already, and that way you'll receive regular
Tracy, I'm sorry, I'll put you on mute by accident. Sorry. I'm so sorry.
Unmute. Right, I'm unmuted now. I'm back. So, thank you for coming along today. And while people are still joining us, please introduce yourselves in the chat and maybe tell us a little bit about any challenges facing your organisation and what you'd like us to look at.
This is clearly not working.
I wondered if everybody else could mute themselves, if they can. Rhonda, you can go through the list and possibly do that. Thanks. So we're doing a series of 3 webinars this week to celebrate Small Charity Week, which is a national celebration of the vital role small charities play in communities across the UK. Small charities make up the majority of SCVO's membership and our sector, and there's lots more support that SCVO can provide on things like funding, information, recruitment, learning, back office services, and we'll tell you more about all of that in a follow-up email after this webinar. And that email will also include some slides from today. Tomorrow's webinar, we're going to look at the update to the SAW. So for anyone interested in all the finance, do sign up to that. You can email me if you want to come along to that and you haven't already signed up. And then on Thursday, we're going to look at charity law and governance. As I said, we're recording this session. So if you do have any confidential or sensitive issues you'd like to discuss and would rather not do that here, then do email us afterwards and we can try and help you with that. Otherwise, as I say, put your questions in the chat and we'll have time to look at these at the end. Now, I'm delighted to be joined today by Robin Fallis and Chris Murphy from Morton Fraser MacRoberts, and they've been a great source of support for SCVO and our members on our legal advice service for many years. The Legal Advice Service gives SCVO members with an income of less than £500,000 access to free legal expert advice on all manner of topics, right from governance and charity law to data protection, property contracts, that kind of thing. So do have a look at that if you're an SCVO member. Now I'm going to hand over now to Robin and he'll get the slides up and do the presentation and we'll take it from there. So over to you, Robin.
Thank you, Tracy. How you doing? Chris is just putting up the slides, so I think everyone can see those. Now, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Tracy will tell me if nobody can hear me. I'm delighted to have moved myself out of a room that was 28 degrees into one that's a bit more manageable. So on we go from here. Today's topic, Essential Trustee Toolkit to ensure legal compliance through difficult times. We invariably try to make this practical and not just dry legal, so hopefully we'll pull out the practical points as we go through today. Presenting today with my colleague Chris. Unfortunately, my colleague Mel, who you'll probably see on the last slide, was unable to join us at the last minute. So moving on, Chris, and we'll go through what we're going to touch on today. Chris is in charge of the slides in true Chris Whitty style. So what we're going to be covering, a reminder of charity trustees' duties. I'm not going to major on this. I'm going to go through it quite quickly. They're quite straightforward, but there's a few themes that I want to pull out. And then I want to get into really practical tips on dealing with difficult decisions. 6 or so slides that really focus in on what we as lawyers see coming up and what we think is useful for charity trustees to negotiate those. To finish off, Chris is hopefully going to bookend that by picking up an overview of Oscar recent inquiries, which ought to show that really Oscar is looking at the same sorts of things that we're going to be talking about, and hopefully that will put our practical tips in context. So we shall go on to our speed refresh of charity trustee duties. I should say, just to re-emphasise what Tracy said, if you've got questions as we go, put them in the chat and we'll come back to them, because I certainly find that really useful parts of these sessions are the discussion at the end, where again we can get into practical points. Okay, a brief recap of charity trustee duties. Shamelessly, this is reflective of Oscar's own sort of visual on this, but I think it's very helpful. On the left-hand side, the core legal duties: acting in the interests of the charity, acting consistent with the charity's purpose, acting with care and diligence, and then managing conflicts. I'll come back to this theme, but 1.1 and 1.1, acting in the interest and acting consistent with the charity's purposes, are substantive things. If you don't do them, you'll immediately get a black mark with Oscar. The two at the bottom, acting with care and diligence and managing conflict of interest, it's quite often a case of having a record of why a decision is reached, having a record of the process that the charity has gone through. On the right-hand side, I like to call these the sort of calendar things that you need to do: submit your accounts, do things with the register, submit financial records. And I suppose added on to that is that the trustee's duty to sort of ensure compliance with fundraising regulations and to provide information to the public when they ask for it. Okay, so moving on, very brief touch on acting in the interests of the charity. Very simple, must do what is in the best for the charity and its beneficiaries. So can't take decisions that are for the benefit of a particular individual, be it trustee, employee, someone who has a business in the area. Must be able to sort of square that off and say, look, we acted in the interests of the charity. Those were the people that was the charity whose needs were put first and foremost. We'll come to it, but there's a connection between the fourth one on conflicts of interest, in that the two go together. You need to be able to show that you're acting in the interest of the charity. You need to be able to show that you've dealt with conflicts of interest. Briefly, as part of this brief recap, conflict of interests are where I, Robin Fallis, at Morton Fraser MacRoberts, would have a conflict of interest if we were the lawyers for a charity, that sort of thing, or if you have a company that's supplying things to the charity. Okay, if we move on again at the high level, reminder on trustees' duties: operating in good faith and ensuring that the charity acts in a manner consistent with its purposes. Very simply, if the charity is to set up to fund public participation in sport, it cannot then give funds out to Morton Fraser MacRoberts, the local sweet shop, or a charity that's promoting the environment. It needs to make sure that it's following the charitable objects in what it's doing, and it needs to follow its constitution. Again, you have your constitutions for each of your charities. In some instances, they'll set out specific powers. You need to make sure that you have the power and that you're acting in a consistent way with its purposes. Another one would be ensuring that the charity has the minimum number of trustees that its constitution says, and ensuring that it's meeting all of the requirements of that. So then the right-hand side, really, that's covered off the first two. I think the points say there, basic is making sure that your trustees have familiarity with that document, ensuring the charity's assets and activities advance those charitable purposes. I just gave those examples, and ensure that the decisions are taken with those purposes and powers in mind. As I said, this one and the one before, you really need to be able to demonstrate those, or you're in trouble with Oscar if you can't. The third duty that we'll come on to now, Chris, if we move on, is acting with care and diligence. And this is one where it's really important to have the charity's records to demonstrate that they acted with care and diligence, because those records are a trustee's protection in difficult times. If Oscar says, why did you take that particular decision? That's your reference point, and you can go through that and say, look, here was the thinking, here was what we thought was good for the charity. We identified those risks, and this is where we got to, and so we discharged our duties. And a few things that to highlight are that it's a higher standard of care than acting on your own behalf. It's a higher standard of care than is put on companies generally, and that's because charities are sort of acting as custodians of the public interest. Ensure you meet legal requirements. We've touched on that in terms of constitution, but that also goes out to compliance with health and safety and other such things. Ensure the charity has sufficient funds. There's no sort of clear place there. It's not as though you're acting out with your constitution or out with your objects. That's a sort of moving feast. So what steps do you take? What steps can you demonstrate to show you that you've met that care and diligence of assuring sufficient funds? Protections of charitable assets, that's making sure there's good bank and risk processes, and we'll touch heavily on that in the toolkit. Ensure the governing body is fit for purpose. Make sure you have a good skill set on the board. So in some instances, those of you in larger charities, a good suite of people in the executive function as well. Reasonable business sense and taking professional advice. Again, it's pretty rare in this area that OSCR will come in and say, you've taken the wrong decision. What they will want to see is a record of a reasonable consideration of pros, cons, risks relevant to decisions that the charity has taken. And of course, that gets into professional advice, be it accountants, lawyers, civil engineers, whoever else, where that sort of thing comes into play and is pertinent. And that's part of acting with care and diligence to protect the charity's assets. And last but not least, exercising effective control over staff and contractors. Just to give an example of that, if the trustees met every 3 months, but a member of the executive or a manager was off doing whatever they wanted or not interfacing and not reporting back to the trustees, then the trustees have failed to exercise care and diligence in the operation of the charities there. So again, you want that ability to show through the framework of arrangements that the charity has in place that you're exercising the effective control. Lastly, at the high level, we have, if we move on, Chris, declaring and managing conflicts. Again, I said this ties into acting in the interest of the charity. In Scotland, there's a specific statutory provision that says you need to manage conflicts between trustees and organisations that have appointed those trustees. Generally on conflicts, I don't want to get into a deep level today because it's not really one of the top tips for navigating difficult times. We'll touch on it with Chris again later. But when it comes to conflicts, simple processes can do what you need to do to be able to show OSCR. So have a register of interest for trustees and have a sort of standing item on your trustee meeting agenda and minutes that says nobody declared their interest, or Robin Val's declared an interest in being a partner at Morton Fraser MacRoberts, and have a simple code of conduct for trustees to reflect that and reflect good behaviours as well, is the basics there. So if we move on, this is more the specific requirements that we touched on, the ones that were on the right-hand side of that early slide in terms of the interfacing with OSCR. We get to ensuring that the details are up to date, reporting to OSCR, obtaining consent if you're changing objects, that sort of thing, and submitting your accounts, carrying out the fundraising and providing information. I said I would go at this quite quickly. I'm assuming this is not particularly new to anyone. So on that basis, I'll move to the next slide, which is collective responsibility. Now, I will pause a little bit here because I find practicing in this area that this one is tricky, because we move from things that are quite clear in terms of process, quite clear in terms of the law, to things that involve people dynamics. If you've got a board of people trying to navigate a difficult time, you will have an array of views within that board. And some people find it difficult at a people level to get to a collective position, or to be a minority in a collective position, but nevertheless to agree to move on that basis. So really important, and we'll emphasise it, collective responsibility of trustees for decision-taking in difficult times. And this has come up in a number of OSCR inquiries, where OSCR make a point of saying just because particular trustees were quiet or whatever else, that didn't mean that they were not responsible for a breach of trustees' duties or misconduct. it's a collective responsibility there. And again, a thing that's worth remembering is that if there's an accountant on the trustee board, a lawyer on the trustee board, or if somebody's the chair or treasurer, then treasurer, they don't particularly have a sort of enhanced duty under the charity legislation there. It's that equal collective responsibility. Okay, very briefly again on the next slide, Chris. Breach of duties, what happens in that place? People have this in their head when they're navigating difficult times. People get worried if a charity tends towards a difficult place. What are the implications of this? What's on the line for me? And in terms of breach of charitable trustee duties, OSCR can come in and investigate charities, and where it finds that there's been misconduct, it can remove or disqualify charities. Being blunt, those tend to be the areas where people are misappropriating finance, the very serious places. In a lot of instances, OSCR will find that, and Chris will touch on it, something's gone a little bit wrong, and in those instances, they'll make a recommendation. Again, board members can be removed if they're in a serious or persistent breach of duties, and of course, there's external reputational damage. Very briefly, I don't want to major on it, but if you're a charitable company, you've also got charitable company and directors' duties that come into play, and other such things. But we're keeping this a little bit high level. If we move to the next slide, if Chris is still there, he is still there. Thank you, Chris. Recently, you're probably all aware, but if not, we had an update to our 2005 Charity Act, which is the 2023 Act, and OSCR updated its powers here. And again, relevant to some of the dynamics we'll come on to and some of the people dynamics that come into play in difficult decision taking, it sort of enhanced its powers. It gave itself an ability to issue positive directions to charities. So it did this for the first time last year with Freewheel North, where it issued them a positive direction to hold an EGM. And it did that because there was a dispute. There was a dispute between two factions within the board, and it was at a sort of status quo. It couldn't move. It was stuck. So OSCR came in there and gave that direction to do something. Similarly, they can intervene and appoint interim trustees. They have extended inquiry powers, including that they can investigate former trustees, which was a gap before, i.e. where someone does something naughty, then resigns as a trustee. Previously, it was a bit more difficult for OSCR to do something. Now they have that power. And a general ability to remove charities that are not complying with those actions, principally the actions of submitting accounts, the actions of interfacing with OSCR. So that is my brief reminder of the trustees' duty sphere and how that interfaces with OSCR. And we'll be coming back to OSCR and Chris's bit at the end. And in this next bit, we'll take a look at how those play through where we have charities in difficulty. And we'll work through what we see as being an essential toolkit for trustees. So at the moment, why have we done a seminar on navigating difficult times? I think it's fair to say at one level post-Brexit, with removal of ESF, ERDF funding, the funding dynamic has changed for a number of charities. Cost implications for charities that have buildings, a number of charities have come into financial difficulties in their operating expenses. Some in the care sector have had issues as a result of national insurance increases. There's a number of financial factors that have made things a little bit more difficult financially. And where you get financial difficulties, you tend to get a few more tensions between people as well, on how do we move this forward, what decision do we need to take, and different ideas about what should be done in that sphere, which we'll come on to explore. So Chris, if we move to the next slide. I really want to spend a little bit of time on this slide and the next one, because I think they quite neatly encapsulate really all of what we see as being the top tips for charities at the moment. Some of this may be relatively basic. You may have it already in place, but I just want to expand on it a little bit. So a risk matrix for a charity. I view this, my way of saying it, it's the beating heart of a charity. If you're a village duck race charity and you sit down and go, well, what's my risks? It's sort of, well, let's make sure nobody gets in trouble in the water. Let's make sure there's no pollution from the ducks. Let's make sure that the money raised all goes to a good cause. And that might be a large part of what your risks are. And if you are a massive childcare provider across Scotland, you're going to have a very detailed risk matrix covering finance, covering employees, senior employees, covering care inspectorate requirements, and it's probably going to run to 20 pages. But the dynamic's equally applicable. It's the beating heart of a charity, because whatever risks associated with your activity that you identify, when you build that out, that's the record that you're giving to OSCR of how you've dealt with that risk, how you've approached that risk. And that's the record of going back to it, that care and diligence that you are supposed to have in place. And a risk matrix really gives you that framework. And where it's used properly, moving to the right-hand side, you update it. You have people that sort of review it every 6 months, 3 months, depends what size of organisation you are. If you're a one a year village duck race, I don't think you're doing it every 3 months. If you're a large childcare charity, you will be. But when you have a more sophisticated one in the large organisations, where you've got risk, measures taken to address the risk, outcome risk levels, and quite often you'll have that review piece. And you might start to see things changing in there during difficult times. Like you might start to feel as a trustee body that employees are starting to feel disgruntled. Maybe the risk of somebody key leaving becomes more acute, but it really becomes an early warning. Or your finance risk. Do we have enough funds? What are our reserves? The finance piece of that risk matrix, when it's reviewed, it starts to show, oh, hold on, that risk seems to have increased. Right, well, we need to think about that. So I come back to it. Key tips, difficult times, have that risk matrix, use that risk matrix for the reasons I've hopefully made clear there. And I'll just emphasize it again. From my perspective, the beating heart, everything that the charity does flows out from that in terms of all the relevant policies, processes to show to OSCR. The next one, up-to-date financial information. I'm not today going to get into charities going bust, going insolvent, administrations of charities. But where those occur, quite often it's because the trustee body doesn't have up-to-date, accurate financial information. In some instances, one of the very, very early ones, that I think it was OSCR's first investigation report, was 1+. And in that instance, the trustees at their meeting were looking at information that was, I can't remember exactly, but 6 months old. So they were always out of date, and it wasn't up to date. So they didn't have a live picture of the charity, where it was. And as a result, they didn't have the early warning to take action against that particular difficulty. In other instances that we see and that OSCR sees, it can be inaccuracies in the final financial information. We see this quite frequently, where a charity thought it was in a good financial position. The trustees thought it was in a good position, but the manager had perhaps made an error in putting that together, and the charity's position wasn't so good. So that's why we get the middle bit on that, is make sure you understand the information, make sure you interrogate that information as trustees, with, if you're lucky enough to have it, your finance director or your manager who's employed to do that, or in other instances, just between yourselves as a trustee body. Those ones that I've just said, they're process, they're records. You can show OSCR that you've had that risk matrix. You can present it to it if they come knocking at your door. You can present OSCR the papers for the board meeting and say, look, this is what we did to keep on top of that financial information, so that we acted in the interest, so that we had that care and diligence in what we were doing. The next one moves into this people dynamic, act and react. So if you as an organisation are starting to see things that are looking difficult come through from these early warning registers of the financial information in the risk matrix, you need to act or react to it. and you need to take the decisions or set processes to deal with the issues that are arising. Now, in not all cases, but in some, the natural tendency is to say, oh, I don't want to do anything rash, or quite often there's maybe a emotional attachment to employees, because if there's cost reductions being made, maybe there's a need to restructure employees there, and there's a hesitancy we see in charities sometimes to deal with that. But I think the point that I would emphasize is that taking no action in that instance falls short of that care and diligence, because you've got to put aside the sort of worry about, I don't know, Jean, the managing director. You've got, because what you should have square in your minds is the interests of the charity, and it's the charity that's hitting a financial difficulty there. So you as a trustee board need to react to that and act. So again, if we come back to where the OSCR processes come in on that, is OSCR wants to see the taking of decisions, the minuting of the decisions, the putting in place of processes, the analysis of processes. And those are the records that then end up being the things that protect you as trustees and show that you have navigated the difficult times in a way that discharges or demonstrates, as I have it on the slide, the duty of care and the acting in the interests of the charity. And Chris, if we move on to the next one, act and react collectively. We're back to this collectively that I said is the other part of this people dynamic, which is difficult, because difficult decisions raise differing views. There might be 4 options on the table. One is that the charity retains Jean. One is that Jean's hours drop. One is that Jean stops working for the charity. One might be reliant on pursuing another income stream. And on a charity board of 10, you might have 3 people thinking it should be option 1, 3 thinking it should be option 2, 4 thinking it should be option 3. But ultimately, the charity needs to reach that decision and reach that decision collectively. And I want to sort of try and introduce a little thing that we see here, and it's around asymmetry of information. I'll go back to my example of OSCR's first positive direction with Freewheel North. In that instance, it's a matter of public record that they had sort of 2 different views within the charity. And it's really difficult for OSCR. It doesn't have the power to come in and take one side's view over the other between a board. And it doesn't have the ability to come in and take one side's view between a board and an executive, if that's where the particular argument is. All it can do is measure what the trustees have done by reference to their records. And we see that asymmetries of information in boards can lead to big problems. So I'll just give an example of that. You might have a very active chair who has all the detail, and they've spoken with Jean about the 3 options, if we go back to that. And they've got all that information in their head, and the rest of the trustees don't. And if a particular option then ends up being the one that's taken forward, you quite often start to get a schism within the charity trustees because of that asymmetry of information. So my practical point on that is, to the largest extent possible, make sure your board have the same information and that they are clear on things. Another example is around employment matters where there may be a grievance or otherwise, and sometimes you get different views within the board on what should be happening there. That's slightly trickier because in terms of integrity of appeal processes through employment processes, you often need to keep part of your trustee body to hear appeals. But it's something that we at Morton Fraser MacRoberts, and I think across the legal world, are increasingly saying, look, let's balance that. Let's get that to the state we can in terms of making sure that all trustees have sufficient information to understand and to take that decision collectively, whilst also retaining that ability. So I hope I've made that point clear, because again, we see a lot of factions in disputes, and I think it comes back to asymmetry of information impacting on trustees' ability to act collectively. I'm back away from my people piece in the next one, which is record reasons why a decision was made. I'm back to my simple territory of when Oscar comes a knocking because there's a problem, all you can do as a charity is provide them with the written documentation that backs up what you've done. It shows, it records the decision. Keep those good records in minutes, keep those good records of the processes, the risk framework, the policies that flow from that, and they help to protect you, show that demonstration of meeting duties. At the bottom there, I've included communicate appropriately. Well, it goes without saying, as part of that people piece, communicate appropriately amongst the board, but also communicate appropriately between boards and executive when you're navigating decisions. And I've used appropriately because in many instances, confidentiality needs to be maintained or needs to be maintained up to a particular point. But when a decision is taken, when something is being moved forward, if you need to have a level of information to stakeholders, a level of information to affected people in that relevant employment process so that they understand what is going on. And if you like, the pyramid from that goes sort of board decision, implementation of decision, appropriate communication with people at an appropriate point. And again, if you have all of that, you're in a far better place than people operating in a vacuum. And where you have a vacuum of information, people get into their heads that trustees are doing something they shouldn't have done or are hiding things from them. And again, that quite often generates complaints to Oscar. So just a few slides that sort of bring out a few of these themes a little bit more. Chris, if we go into the next one. And I'm back to my toolkit for monitoring risks. So I just want to emphasize that toolkit for navigating different times. Identify the risks for your charity in a risk matrix. Keep it live. Have clear communication channels within your board as to that risk matrix. If you're a large enough charity, then you may be operating with a risk committee. You may be operating with an executive function that feeds into that risk committee. But make sure that your board has visibility of that and that it's a proper live document where you've got trustees and an executive function. In order to have a handle on everything that's going on in a complex childcare organisation, there needs to be people communication that needs to be a live document because risks are changing all the time. Across that document, make sure that it's evaluating the likelihoods of risks occurring and the potential impact. That drives you to the ones that the charities really need to be aware of. It drives priorities in what's tackled, as well as I said, serving as a very useful early warning indicator of where action needs to be taken. Again, back to my beating heart theory, if you've got that in place, then the risk document generates the production of policies, generates the production of a framework of records that demonstrate that the trustees are doing what they should be doing. And key to all that is live document, monitor, keep it live, make sure that you're reviewing the risks, reviewing the updates, reacting to things on the ground. That's back to my theme a minute ago of act and react. So just a small bit to bring that a little bit to life on the next slide, Chris, would be cyber fraud and phishing attacks that, I don't know how old I am these days, maybe it's 7 years ago. 7 years ago, we're never on the sphere of a charity's risk matrix, but they've exploded over the last 5. So they suddenly started appearing as everyone moved to internet-based banking and the cloud and everything else. And so you have that sitting on the risk register. You look at the evaluation of the likelihood and the impact, and if it's a live document, becoming increasingly common, potential impact can be very significant, and then you're mapping out your measures to mitigate that, have a policy in place, implement strict financial controls, have staff training that sits behind it. Again, horses for courses between Village Duck Race and National Childcare Charity, but you can see how that comes into play. And down at the bottom, you then monitor and review that, and that drives things like, oh, we've not done the training that we should have done. Oh, that's a miss, right, let's do that. And that comes back to that care and diligence. Briefly on financial controls, because it tends to be the area of Oscar focus on the next slide. Again, just remember that it's all trustees to have an understanding of this, the financial controls, and where to find more detailed information. Not everybody is an accountant, but the trustee body should understand the operation of the finances, the protections that are in place. And again, I suppose on the list of important things, the ones where Oscar will tend to take the most serious action is where charitable assets have been misused, misappropriated, moved out of the charity sphere into other areas. And obviously that when finance is lost, it's moved out of the charity sphere into another area. I've already said, keep that financial reporting up to date, and trustees need to have that active examination of it, really sort of interrogate, make sure that somebody's not missed something. I'll be the first to admit I'm not an accountant, but I do my best to understand them and examine them where I'm sitting there in my trustee role with that in mind. And important to have written procedures relevant to the likes of phishing, operation of accounts, and that would sit on your risk register of the risk is that our bank accounts could be emptied. So we have these processes in place, these controls in place, and those are what protect us. And again, Oscar has information on that on its website and guidance on that. And then if we move on to the next slide, Chris, again, I'd like to sort of come back to a point I made earlier. In a lot of instances, Oscar will not involve itself as to whether a trustee body has taken the right or wrong decision in what it's decided to do, unless the first two ones were if it's not acted in the interests of the charity, or if it's not acted in accordance with the Constitution. Those are very black and white. But in other things, for example, should the charity have undertaken that particular fundraising processes that ended up not raising the money it thought or cost more than should have been the case, what Oscar is looking for there is the record of why the trustees went with that, the analysis that the trustees done on that, relevant to ensuring that care and diligence. So that's the bit that connects back. And above that, the very general point is make sure you're reviewing everything, reviewing the updated guidance to keep on top of things. Seek external advice where needed, we've talked about, but if you're navigating difficult times, if a cost crunch is coming, I think a point of emphasis there would don't sit and not react to it. If the money is running out, usually that's indicated by a drop in the reserves or the financial information that you're getting. Seek that advice where you don't have the expertise. I think those are the things we would say there. Finally, on the toolkit and acting collectively, if we move to the next slide, Chris. Again, back to the people dynamics, collective decision taking. Make sure your trustees all have the same information. Avoid these schisms that you get between boards in difficult times, where people get ideas in their head that one person's doing this because of X or Y. Open discussion so far as possible, respectful discussion so far as possible, with that collective duty of Oscar's clear in your head. You know, advice, and I'm not ambulance chasing here, but obtaining appropriate advice, accountants, lawyers, whoever else, that can be useful when it's difficult because it's neutral third-party advice. So it's not led by a dominant chair. It's not led by somebody who might be quite close to one of the employees or anything. It gives that further ability to move through. Maintain the clear record of decision making. And as I said before, and hopefully just a point of emphasis there, ensure the appropriate communication to stakeholders and beyond the board. So I'm now going to hand over to Chris, who's going to manage his own slides because he's excellent at multitasking, and hopefully some of what he say will pull through some of the things that I've been saying, but he'll do so by reference to the Oscar investigations. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Robin. For posterity, I might say next slide, Robin, just to indicate that the next slides are coming. You can pretend that you've moved them on. Yeah, thanks very much. As a quick background on how Oscar investigations or inquiries come about, there's three sort of main ways. If Oscar is concerned about a charity and the way it's operating, it can investigate itself. A concern can be raised to Oscar by any person in respect of a charity on its register. or a charity can self-report if it thinks there's issues happening to OSCAR. And upon that happening, OSCAR may determine that it needs to open an investigation into the charity under Section 28 of the 2005 Act. In terms of what OSCAR can investigate, it can investigate charities, charity subsidiaries, the people involved in charities or charity subsidiaries, or any body representing itself as a charity which is not registered with OSCAR, although that's quite rare. There are some circumstances where OSCAR must publish reports of inquiries on its website for transparency. For example, when it's issued a direction to a charity either to not do or after 2023 do something, or if it's removing a charity from the register. OSCAR can also choose to publish reports where it considers the report can help inform other charities. For that reason, we recommend that charities review these intermittently to ensure that they're covering all bases and can implement any suggestions made by OSCAR to ensure good governance and help increase resilience. It's important to note that investigations taking place are not necessarily an indication of guilt. In some instances, OSCAR is just looking for further information and concludes that it is satisfied with the information provided, but it's definitely useful to review the recent OSCAR reports to see what they're looking at and the recommendations to the wider charity sector, which are usually quite helpfully set out at the end of each report. Next slide, Robin. So, in terms of a brief review for investigations which took place across 2025, there were 9 investigative reports published in total, covering a range of issues, which we've grouped into some buckets here, illustrating the focus towards financial concerns, governance concerns, and breach of trustee duties. There were also some conflicts of interest queries and a couple of niche areas such as land sales. Financial concerns are often a reason OSCAR will start an investigation without a concern of self-referral being raised, particularly if it notices that a charity is not keeping up to date with its filing responsibilities. Breach of trustee duties remains a common theme for investigations, particularly where trustees are unaware of or do not understand their responsibilities. You'll hopefully agree that this list reflects the topics that Robin's already brought up, highlighting the importance of having a toolkit in place which, if implemented correctly, can be used to monitor and manage risks. This includes steps such as clearly recording decisions being made by the charity, ensuring that appropriate people are taking decisions with collective agreement from others, sharing those responsibilities, and knowing when to consult or review governing documents and policies, and also when to seek legal advice. There have only been 2 investigatory reports issued in 2026 so far, which, glass half full, could be a positive sign that everybody's doing what they should be doing, and I will now move on to discuss those in a little bit more detail. Next slide, Robin. So as a caveat to when I was saying it's not all doom and gloom when OSCAR opens an investigation and it might not be all going wrong, this is one where it was all going wrong. So the first charity that they reported on in 2026 has also been a headline on BBC News. Other news outlets are available as recently as yesterday. Fernhill School Limited is an independent school in Glasgow, and it's been registered as a charity for over 50 years. It's a charitable company, so it's also regulated by Companies House. OSCAR opened an investigation into the charity as it did not submit annual financial accounts to OSCAR for the past 3 financial years. And upon further checks, OSCAR established that the charity's trustees had filed sets of unaudited dormant company accounts for the past 2 financial years at Companies House. OSCAR wrote to the charity to seek further information on the financial position of the charity, and the charity did not respond to this request. It was then found that the school's accountants had resigned in 2025 over the filing of unaudited dormant accounts, and the accountant had similarly not been able to find out from the trustees why this had happened. So these actions led to OSCAR to consider that the trustees had breached their duties under Section 66 of the 2005 Act, which was the acting in the best interests of the charity, resulting in the misconduct and in the administration of the charity. OSCAR used its powers under Section 30B of the Act to direct the charity to provide financial and other relevant governance information. So, what are the key takeaways from this report? First, as Robin mentioned, steps should be taken to ensure that decisions are taken in the best interest of the charity and have all of these decisions recorded. Although, as Robin mentioned, in this instance, the potential breach, the end decision, is actually taken into account by OSCAR, but for some other decisions, it's a case of showing out your working. Secondly, to ensure trustees are aware of the responsibilities to Oscar and any other regulators, in this case, in terms of financial responsibilities. As Robin mentioned earlier, financial controls need to be understood by all trustees and the appropriate mechanisms put in place to ensure that the correct processes are being followed if an investigation ends up taking place. Understanding the requirements of all regulators will avoid issues in terms of filing the wrong types of financial information. Then need to ensure that trustees are reminded there's a collective responsibility among them to ensure requirements of the charity are met. And that's not just the trustee who's taken on submitting accounts or the finance committee or an audit committee with delegated responsibilities for any financial matters. The charity should also be ensuring that it responds to Oscar requests in a timely manner. Keeping quiet about issues with the charity will not make the issues go away, and Oscar can use its powers to positively direct the charity to provide information or take actions if it considers this to be required. Additionally, even if the charity ceases to exist, Oscar can continue its investigation into relevant persons, so whilst it's the end of the road for the school in this case, the investigation will continue and may still result in the trustees being found guilty of an offence. Ideally, having a toolkit in place will avoid this sort of doomsday scenario where by the time Oscar became involved, it was too late to take any corrective actions which might have saved the charity, and at this stage the school was closed and appointed liquidators. The toolkit can and should be used as an ongoing monitor of risk to the charity and present the charity with clear steps to mitigate and identify risks. Next slide, Robin. There we go. So the next report hasn't been the focus of major news items, but still provides another good gauge of what Oscar are looking at and also what they can do even if they suspect that a breach of charity law is taking place. The Gateway for the Less Privileged is a Glasgow-based unincorporated association which was registered as a charity in 2018. Its charitable purposes are to prevent and relieve poverty in Scotland and Africa and to provide education aimed towards employability. Oscar opened an investigation into the charity in 2024 following receipt of reports expressing concerns around how the charity was going about its fundraising activities. The charity had carried out public fundraising collections through one trustee, and concerns were raised that it failed to follow the correct fundraising processes and report the amount of money collected to the relevant local authority. Oscar then contacted the charity to gather information on who the trustees were, the activities carried out, and how they furthered charitable purposes, and also how charitable assets were being used. In this instance, the trustees did respond to Oscar, and they said that only limited activities had taken place. Oscar then found further information provided by someone else, by a concerned party, which showed that the charity continued to publicly fundraise in other local authority areas in Scotland whilst the investigation was ongoing. The investigation also considered that there were overdue accounts and trustee annual reports for the past 3 financial years. Oscar then used its powers under Section 28 of the 2005 Act to take a precautionary or preemptive measure pending further inquiries and issued a direction to the charity not to undertake any further activities for a period of 6 months while it carries out further investigation. So what are the key takeaways from that report? Firstly, ensure charitable activities such as fundraising are in furtherance of your charitable purposes and keep governing documents updated to ensure that these remain fit for purpose. Ensure that all trustees understand the governing documents and keep records of decision-making processes which might be helpful as evidence that the trustees have met their responsibilities. Second, when asked to provide information to Oscar, try to provide as much information as possible to avoid the regulator having to step in and potentially go as far as pausing activities when things are unclear. Again, ensure that trustees are aware that regulatory requirements and deadlines are there and that there's a collective responsibility to report to Oscar. When it comes to finances, avoid having one trustee in control of funds. In this case, it appears that one individual was collecting funds raised and not carrying out their trustee duties, but this failure will be applied to all trustees. One thing that may have helped prevent the current situation for this charity is having more than one trustee able to view charity bank accounts or spending records and report to the council collectively, as this would have helped reduce the likelihood of any financial impropriety flying under the radar. At the sharp end, failure to comply with an Oscar direction not to undertake activities could result in a fine of up to £2,500, imprisonment for up to 3 months or both, in addition to any potential other offences related to the breach of fundraising rules. I'd like to now hand back over to Robin for a brief summary of what we've covered today. Next slide, Robin.
Thank you, Chris. but I don't think you'll find that it's got a summary there. It's just the end of our presentation. So thank you very much, Chris. But what I can see is that we do already have some questions in the chat. So I would like to pick up on some of them. I'll go with the one from Miller Malloy first, which is, can you record a dissent in the minute of trustees in a contentious issue? I think the answer to that is yes, but probably sort of, again, in the spirit of collective decision taking, take the heat out of it by saying, such and such disagreed with the decision or abstained or voted against the decision. A simple record of something like that is fine. But again, it's that collective responsibility. You can do that. It can sit there doing what it does. I would say that where there are very serious divergences, that can be the point at which people who disagree decide that they're going to move on from being a trustee. But in other instances, people don't want to move on. But yes, the bottom line is that you can record such things. And then we have a question from Sarah Jones, which is right in the sort of difficult area. Any advice on how to best deal with a particular trustee who wishes to pursue what might be a vanity project, supported by a small number of active members, but which other trustees are concerned may not be best use of resources? There is a vein of difficulty with, let's call it, wide membership organisations that then have appointed trustee bodies, and within those there are lots of instances in which again you have a divergence of views within a community, and quite often one part of a community will push one agenda and others will be against it. They are difficult to work through, but from a trustee perspective, the trustee decisions on what projects the charity ultimately takes forward will be a collective decision of the current trustees. So that needs to be sort of openly discussed, the meeting recorded, the decision taken as to whether the vanity project is pursued or not. Now, that can, just for completeness, that can lead to issues down the line, where if a sufficiently big number of background members wanted the vanity project done, they can sometimes remove the board and put in a board that will do the vanity project, but that's another level of difficulty. I think in terms of the immediate question, I think the trustee body would have a robust discussion and a decision and report its reasons for the decision on whether or not to go with the vanity project. I hope I've answered that, Sarah, but feel free to come back if I have not, or if I've got the wrong end of the stick. And then we have a question, could you provide a list of the minimum policies that a charity is required to have in place? That's a difficult one to answer, because what I was trying to get across is you've got the spectrum of the village duck race to the childcare charity. The childcare charity may have anywhere between 15 and 40 policies. It might have a sort of anonymous donations policy and a safeguarding policy and employee handbook with all sorts of employees attached into that. Whereas the village duck race may have a policy for safe conducting of its race and some basic pieces there, and a fundraising policy. There isn't a particular number. What I was saying, and back to my beating heart idea, I like the idea of you identify what, in your risk matrix, you identify what your different operations are and what you're doing, and where you need to have a framework of policies and documentation to cover off what you're doing. I think that's the easier way to look at it there. So sorry if that feels like a lawyer dodge, but I don't think I can answer it in any other way. And then we have a question, what's the minimum level of funds that a small charity should have? I suppose enough to make sure that it covers off its outgoings and is a going concern, enough to convince its accountants that it doesn't need to wind up or something worse, and that will be a factor linked to what its costs are. Chris has already mentioned examples where there's dormant accounts in some instances. In those instances, if dormant accounts are put in for a number of years, then Oscar will probably look at the charity and possibly remove it, or possibly just ask what's happening there. So there's not really a minimum level. If you go back to a village duck race, and sort of I've said that a few times, but it's just an easy way of visualising it. It might be that they have £400 in their accounts, but no outgoings in a particular year. So not particularly a minimum level. If you ask me it a slightly different way, I think charities at the moment, certainly the larger ones, are carrying about a year's reserve, or want to do that to navigate difficult times. I'm sure Tracy will have other observations on that, possibly.
That reserve question is always a difficult one, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
There's another one about trustees micromanaging, Robin. How do you get away from that?
Thank you. That's a very good question, because that's not the trustees' role. And where the trustees do that, it can lead to, guess what, schisms and arguments down the line, sometimes by employees who think that it's being interfered in with too much and it's not appropriate. And sometimes it can lead to going back to my asymmetry of information in a board. So I think you need to, or the best examples that we see are boards where the trustees are aware of that potential. And if they see that a particular trustee is getting towards micromanaging, they say, I think you need to pull back from that. That's not our role. Our role is to set the strategy. We have people in place to do that. We are to set the framework, the risk documents, the policies, and we shouldn't be getting involved in that micro detail there. So what I would say on that, Anne, is thanks for the question, because it's a good point to pull out, because it again, in navigating difficult times, sometimes a very active trustee will jump into that role, and you just need to be aware of it and make sure it doesn't impact on collective decision making or lead to these problems. We have another question. Oh, we have a few more questions that are popping in now. Other services that provides policies, provide guidance on compliance. Tracy, do you want to go at that first? Because there's a number of organisations that are available.
Yeah, I mean, obviously SCVO do provide templates for our members that you can access on our website. They have been, a lot of them, drafted with some legal advice, but obviously you have to make sure, as with any template, it fits what you're doing as an organisation. So if I'll use Robin's example, you're a big childcare organisation, then you probably do need to rely on some legal help for that. And in which case, if you're an SCVO member, you can come to us and ask for a review of any particular policy or procedure. There's certain intermediary bodies, you know, there's an after school care one, there's various ones. So if it's working in a particular area, you might get some help there. Robin, do you have anything to add to that before we finish up?
No, I mean, I think that's right. You know, we live in a very digital age. There's a lot of documents that are also out there available generally. But I think you do, if you're going to go down that route, I think you do also need to look at them and make sure they're right for you.
Yeah. I have one more question, just because it was submitted before the webinar, and it was about potential funding available to charities with regard to legal fees, conveyancing. You know, if say they wanted to reorganise or they wanted to change structure. Any ideas on that, Robin, other than obviously SCVO's Legal Advice Service? Are you aware of any funding for that?
It's difficult because it's sometimes in different pots, but there's quite often Scottish government money that goes through intermediary organisations. Examples would be First Port, others might be Challenges Worldwide, Community Enterprise in Scotland, Just Enterprise Programme. I can't remember if that one's still running, that in some instances will have funds available. I think Community Enterprise is another one. But there are other sources of support. There's Inspiring Scotland is a source of support through a network that it has. and I think Development Trust Association as well. Apologies if anyone's on the call that I've missed out. But I think those are the places that you can look, or examples of places you can look.
And I would also give a shout out, actually, just because I see Elaine Crichton's on the call, who used to be at Inspiring Scotland. And if you need any kind of specialist advice, I would certainly go to Inspiring Scotland. They have people that can help you with very particular things going on in a charity. So I'm sure Rhonda will put the link to that in the chat. But I'm aware we're at 2 o'clock now. So I just want to thank you all for taking part, and special thanks to Chris and to Robin. I think that's been a really useful session. As I say, join us tomorrow for the SOAP, or Thursday for more charity law and governance if you wish. And I'd also finally like to highlight that we're doing a new Trustees for Impact training sessions running from September. They'll be in the evening online. So if that's something you're interested in, do look at our events page and you can sign up for them. It would be lovely to see some of you there. That's it. It's 2 o'clock. I don't want to keep you any longer than we should. So thank you all. And I hope you found that useful. Slides will go out in an email. Thank you. Bye-bye. That's everybody out now, isn't it?
Aye.
Yes.
Did we pass?
Yes, thank you. That was really useful. Thanks. And good questions at the end. Some of the ones were very much how long's a piece of string, but there you go. You do get those ones.
I was going a bit further than I normally go there in the people thing.
No, I think it's the people thing that matters, because that's what people come across most. It's the people thing.
Yeah. Did it make sense the way I said it?
Yeah. No, and I like the more emphasis on risk and that collective responsibility. I think that's where a lot of the problems lie. And that was a good question about the dissent, getting that in your minutes and whether you can do that. You know, those real basic questions that people don't know the answers to. I thought that was useful. What about you, Rhonda?
Yep, I was just waiting for someone to mention the dreaded founder word, and I thought, and they didn't, thank goodness. But
Yeah, I think I did at one point, or if I didn't, it was in my head.
No, that was useful. Thank you.
And how did you think Chris did on his first SCVO editing?
I thought it was very good. I liked the lessons from the reports. Yeah, and I particularly liked grouping them all into themes, for 2025. I thought that was really useful, actually. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Well done, Chris.
Thank you.
I had to cut out due to time my long-winded analogy about Splash Mountain, which is unfortunate, but maybe next time.
Maybe next time. We didn't get to hear that one.
No doubt you'll be rushing to get us to do another one, because we're so easy to get tied down a date and remember to answer your emails. So.
Well, you're willing, but it's difficult to get a date. But well, I'll give you the date now. 2nd week in November, Trustees Week Conference. Don't know the date yet, but we'd like you to come along to that and do something at that.
Wonderful. Let's do it.
Yes. So
Mel, sorry she couldn't be here.
Oh, no, I don't think I've met Mel. Have you met Mel, Rhonda?
I think Rhonda's away, is she?
No, she's there, but I think she's frozen, I think. You froze there. Have you met Mel?
But I froze. If I have, I've forgotten.
So Mel does loads of charity stuff. She used to work very closely with Val. So she does like individual trustee training, she does governance reviews, and she's really good because she's got the kind of data and IP and sort of cyber stuff. She's really good on that.
That's useful. Yep.
Yeah. All right.
Great,
Onwards and
thank you.
upwards.
Thank you very
Better
much.
go. Thank you.
We'll get any really difficult questions as a follow-up. We'll send them straight on to you.
Yeah, send them to Chris. That's fine. Thank
Just
you.
forward one to Chris right now.
Thanks very much.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.